Good morning. That was a good hour of worship. I want to be inclusive for a moment, so I'm going to speak in tongues. Primero, quiero decir alguna cosa en español. Por favor, solo la gente de habla español me da una respuesta a una pregunta. ¿Estás disfrutando de la conferencia? And I can't leave out the French. And my wife was trying to tutor me this morning on how to say this, because she said all my French sounds like Spanish. But, veuillez seulement parler en français, me donner une réponse, êtes-vous profitez de la conférence? Hey, they understood me. Where's Tammy? See? I'm just asking them if they've had a good conference. And you can tell they did. I certainly have had a wonderful time here. I've mentioned this to a few people, and so I feel almost compelled to tell you all. Not as much as I love this, I have one frustration: that I can't spend time with each one of you over a meal. Some people I got to talk to for 5 minutes, some people a half an hour, some people we just got a picture together, some I did get to have a meal with, but I just there. I look out and I see so many of you. I wish this could go on longer so that I could schedule a meal with each one of you. You know, that's the interesting thing about the Bible that has always fascinated me. The Bible begins with food, the Garden of Eden. And the Bible ends with more food, the tree of life producing fruit and the rivers of living water. And in between, we got the Lord's Supper. So I'm a foodie, and I like eating with you people. Now, I have several PowerPoint slides here to try and keep me organized in this presentation. And this is going to be pretty stream of consciousness. A lot of you said, keep telling more stories. Well, I know that's what I often do anyway, but I'll tell some more. Greg not only had me speak the first day about looking out the back door, and I heard from quite a few of you that Creedence Clearwater Revival was one of your favorite bands too. And for those who weren't here that first day, I mentioned that another reason I love the title is it strikes me as a messianic metaphor. I like that, drinking that clear water, the true clear water. And as I was preparing, I think I told you that I was listening to a Creedence Clearwater concert in the background, and that's where I got the first title, Looking Out My Back Door. And then the last song they played was Long As I Can See the Light. And I said, man, this is just an inspired day for me. Because those words to the song sort of fit where I'm at in my life right now. The words go something like this: though I'm gone, you don't have to worry, long as I can see the light. Now, we're all in various stages of our mortality. I am fully aware of mine. I'll be 66 in, less than 4 months. And I realize that I have a few good years of energy left. God has really blessed me. I used to experience zero jet lag. I mean, not a drop. And we go to Australia, we go to Africa, and I adjust overnight. The switch is flipped and I'm just good. My dear friend Mike Fazell, I know when I travel with him, he'd be laying down with a cold rag on his head, and he'd look at me and say, "What's wrong with you?" But I've noticed the last 5 years, I now commiserate with how I should have been commiserating with Mike back then. Now I feel the jet lag. And it sometimes takes me a whole week to recover. I suppose that has something to do with aging. And I realize it's time for me to think about winding down, to use the biblical language. I must decrease, and the person who will succeed me must increase. And I guess as the song goes, I've got that traveling bone because this feeling won't leave me alone. It's not just the jet lag. I can see that my energy levels are not what they used to be. I know a lot of you still look at me and say, "Oh, Joe, you're so young." Thank you. But remember, we're not supposed to lie. I look in the mirror in the morning, and some mornings I'm frightened. Who is that? What happened? But as the song continues, I won't be losing my way long as I can see the light. And then John Fogerty sings dolefully, "Yeah, yeah, yeah," 3 times. How very Trinitarian of him. So, facing my retirement is a prospect of mixed emotions, and I'll explain that as we go on. Rick Warren, I mentioned how I met Rick Warren, and he had told me that he spent at least 2.5 years studying how Jesus Christ did ministry. It was his own personal study. It's what he did before he planted his church in Southern California that became a world-famous megachurch. And I'll confess to having done the same thing. I studied Jesus' ministry, and I wanted to have something easy that I could remember to shape how I minister and pattern it after Jesus. I pray everyone does the same thing. And on the next slide, I list what has been my 4 personal core values: truth, relationship, mission, and appreciation. You might recall I wrote a book entitled Truth That Transforms. And I'm into truth-telling. And the 2 most important truths that I've been trying to emphasize in my tenure is, number 1, the triune nature of God, and number 2, our true identity is in Jesus. I was so happy we sang that song. And I got the biggest kick out of, like Greg mentioned, that little guy on the end. Now, he wasn't quite following the choreography, but he was close. And he was with it. And I enjoyed the little girl who kept jumping up and down. She didn't know where to be, but she kept wanting to be back. But the one I enjoyed the most was not the little children singing, although that I loved. It was Lewis over here doing the sign language. He was into it as much as the children were. It was wonderful to behold. Now, relationship is another thing. My dad and mom just, by osmosis, I guess, I grew up just loving to be with people. I remember Bernie Snippert one time said, "Joe, I can't be with people like you. I'm out of energy in a small crowd." He said, "Somehow, when you're with people, it's like it charges your batteries. I see you getting more and more energized as you're with people." Well, maybe that's my gift. I think it's been a good thing. And I emphasize relationship, and I think Kathy Detta was particularly elegant in explaining it the other day, and how God particularly loves each one of you. And we privately, a few of us refer to it as the Kathy Detta intervention, where she comes up and puts her 2 hands on either side of your face and says, "God loves you." Can I make it any more clear? And mission, we've been called by Jesus to do this mission. And one of the things I've noticed as Jesus was fulfilling his mission was he always showed appreciation for people. Even in places where it could be heard as controversial. I'm reminded of that one time when he heard the Pharisee pray, and then he heard the tax collector pray, and what did Jesus say? He said, well, yeah, this tax collector who said, forgive me because I'm a sinner, Jesus said out loud, yeah, that's the guy who's going home justified. That's the guy who will be exalted. Man, can you appreciate how encouraging that might have been to hear? So I've tried to acknowledge as many people as I can and how they've been faithful. And so let me say, thanks to all of you. You've been faithful. And I want to acknowledge Tammy too, because I'm up on the stage of way more than she is, and I travel way more than she does. You know, someone has to stay home and pay the bills. Someone has to mow the lawn. It wasn't until, well, almost a year ago, we took out the lawn. So now even Tammy doesn't have to mow it. And it saves us on the water bill, too. But Tammy and Sheila Graham, quite a few years ago, inaugurated our women's ministry. And they've traveled all around the world, jump-starting women's ministry. And now I think that's going pretty well. How many female pastors and elders do we have that are here? Would you please stand up? Bravo. You know, I have to be careful how I say things because I know this is being taped and will somehow end up on YouTube. But a couple of our splinter groups have a little bit of difficulty because they see that our ladies have gifts and they're fully participating. And this is interesting, you know, before we made that doctrinal change, I had no small number of men say to me, you know, Joe, you know, we have enough problems with the ordained men and some don't get along and the pecking order and who thinks they're more spiritual than others and et cetera. What do you think's going to happen when we start ordaining women? We haven't had a problem. Zero. Yeah, it's been very good. You know, Tammy was and Sheila were recently in Africa, where they were in Cape Town and Joburg from conferences. I stayed home to mow the lawn, but then there was no lawn. And Tammy was driving in a remote part of South Africa after the conference, and she saw an elderly woman walking on the side of the road with a very heavy burden on her back and her shoulder, carrying this heavy burden. And Tammy stopped the car, you know, pulled over to the side and said, boy, that's a heavy burden. What is that? And it was a lot of clothing that she was going to take back to her village. And after a bit of small talk with the elderly woman, and Tammy offered her to ride, the elderly woman looked into the car and saw that there was a brown paper bag with a bottle in it. And the elderly lady said, so what's in the bag? And Tammy said, it's a bottle of wine for my husband. And the elderly lady was quiet. And then she said, good trade. Well, you liked my joke so much the first day, I had to try one more. I'm glad you like that. But Tammy puts up with me and the bad attitudes I've had over the years, so please thank her too. One of the things I enjoy about church administration and the office staff is they have adopted these core values. And I think you've seen that in this conference. Now, I imagine you've all heard the saying, ignorance is bliss. Has everyone heard that? It's not true. But it comes from a 18th century poem by some Cambridge professor named Thomas Gray. And it's not a bad poem if you want to go look it up. I'm not going to quote it to you. But it's just not true. Ignorance is not bliss. And on my next slide, I put together a Venn diagram, as these things are called, these overlapping circles. And I call it the diagram of understanding. And in my life, I have been in all 7 of these spaces in the circle. I don't know if you can read them clearly on the chart, but there are those who don't understand, those who understand a little, those who don't understand what they do understand, those who will never understand, those close to understanding, and those who think they understand but really don't. And the light is shining, you see, in the middle. That's where we're at. That's where Jesus has brought us. And I'm so delighted that he has. I'm reminded of a meeting that I had. I won't mention names, but 3 of the leaders of one of the largest splinter groups wanted to talk to me, and I said, well, sure, there's 3 of you, I'll bring 2 friends. And so I asked Greg Albrecht and Richard Rice to come join me. And so we sat around a big round table and talked about the doctrinal changes and why they're right and why they're good. And the one fellow said to me, and he's a leader of one of the groups, he says, well, Joe, I like you, and I read everything you've written. I've heard what you've explained, but Joe, I've got an IQ over 140, and I can't understand this. And Richard Rice, bless his soul, said, well, all the little widows in my church understand it just fine. So, I didn't know what I was going to say to answer that, and I didn't have to, because Richard Rice nailed it. I'm sad that Richard Rice and Dean Blackwell aren't here to enjoy this celebration, but it's interesting. I learned a lesson from the 2 of them. They both were 75 years old when they died. I mean, they were the same age. And they both were mentors to me through my college years and even afterward. And Richard Rice, he was one of these guys that was very, very careful with his diet. He would never overeat. And he wouldn't eat certain things. And he would run no less than 7 miles a day. At the office, at lunchtime, he'd put on his runners, his gym shoes, and he'd go out and run. The rest of us were eating. And he always was very thin and svelte and, just could have been on the cover of GQ magazine. That's how good Richard looked. Now, Uncle Dean, as I called him, Dean Blackwell, on the other hand, he never met a pie he wouldn't eat. And Uncle Dean, he could have been a poster boy. Well, the American Heart Association would have used him as a negative example. But what's interesting is, as careful as Richard was with his diet and as much as he exercised, he died in bed of a heart attack at 75. Dean Blackwell, as uncareful as he was, died of a heart attack at 75. So I'm trying to be somewhere in between. I don't want to exercise too much and just be a good-looking corpse. But I want to exercise the right amount so that I can stay a flat belly. At least I keep working on that. But I think if we're all honest, you'll all admit we have all been in these different parts of the overlapping circles. And what I love about my little Venn diagram is the very center of the 3 circles, the center of the center, where Jesus is, where Jesus lives, it's the center of God's genius plan, is where he has brought us. and we understand. And once you understand grace, my goodness, everything else just falls into place, does it not? I briefly want to talk about the numbers. Do I ever? From 1995 to 2005, I felt like a wounded soldier in a bloody battle. Many of you probably did too. We all lost family and friends. And I saw this quote that I think expressed it well. It's a note that General Nathaniel Greene wrote to Francis Marion, and he said this: "History affords no instance wherein an officer has to keep possession of a country under so many disadvantages as you have. Surrounded on every side with a superior force, hunted from every quarter with veteran troops, you have found means to elude all their attempts and to keep alive the expiring hopes of an oppressed militia when all succor seemed to be cut off. To fight the enemy with the prospect of victory is nothing, but to fight with intrepidity under the constant impression of defeat and inspire irregular troops to do it is a talent peculiar to yourself." Well, that's the talent of Jesus Christ. And the fact that Grace Communion International survived all of that stuff points to the miracle. On the next slide, we rehearse the miracle in the numbers. 1987, when we began to make doctrinal changes, you'll recall the first one was it's okay for ladies to wear makeup. And then there was the recognition that the Seder and Passover are the same night. There is no separate second holy day, as Herbert Armstrong reasoned. And then the Trinity. And that's when the tree got shaken and the pruning began. And we had 240,000 worldwide in attendance in 1987. 140,000 were baptized members. And then that change occurred, and over the course of 10 years, that is when my dad died in 1995, the next 2 years we saw the numbers descend. And we got to 65,000 in attendance, 55,000 members worldwide. And the income took a commensurate slide. It fell, and our auditors would tell us it is an absolute miracle that you are still a going concern. It is absolutely a miracle that you survive this. And then we move another 10 years ahead to 2007. And that's when I felt like this quote from the general to the other general. I thought, is this ever going to stop? We're praying, we're worshiping, we're teaching the truth, we're doing all the right things. God, where are you? And then it started to happen. Slow trickle of people returning. It still happens. Last round of conferences I went to, I met a member who used to be with us who has returned at every conference I went to. It's a trickle, but I'll take it. When you're thirsty, a trickle tastes good. And then another miraculous thing happened. People would go to our website, and when I say people, elders, pastors around the world, and they'd start studying our website, and then they'd email me or others and say, I want to bring my church into GCI. I don't know how many other denominations experience this, but we're getting 100 requests a year to churches to come join us. We cannot keep up with them. Now, we recognize that probably many of them are trolling for Canadian and American and Australian dollars. But at least 10% of those are joining us. And some are still on the hook. But the wonderful news is when we took the count in 2017, and I might add these figures, in some places I have last year's figures or figures from 2 years ago, but most places I have current figures. We have, as you can see, started going up. The trend line We have not 36,000 like we did in 2007. We're now 40,000 members in 2017 and 50,000 in attendance. In many places, the attendance is greater than the number of baptized members, well, except in the U.S. I don't know why the U.S. is backwards on that. Well, actually, I think I do. We're an aging church here in the U.S., and we have a lot of people who, well, they just can't come to services every week. And so that's why our attendance can fluctuate by a few thousand every week. So on the next slide, I show you a pie chart of where our members reside. It used to be that the United States was the biggest slice of the pie. No more. Africa is the biggest slice of the pie. We have 14,000 members in the continent of Africa. We have 10,000. Yeah, I'm for applauding that. And I should add, it's 14,000 and counting. Every week, I get emails from Africa of new baptisms and another church that's joined us. And I really love when it's a Sabbatarian church that comes into the light. We had one this year join us. Their name was Church of God of the Sabbath. What does that tell you, brethren? And when KK, that's our affectionate name for Kalanguli Kaoma. It's easier to say, too. When KK met with them, they were hostile at first. But as they listened to him, a miracle occurred, and that church joined us. So we're 14,000 and counting in Africa, and 10,620 in the U.S. And you can see the pie chart. In the Philippines, they're always baptizing people and planting new churches. It seems like every 2 months I hear of a new church in the Philippines. And the last count I got from Eugene was 5,300, but I think we're probably closer to 6,000. And in Asia, when John Biswa gave his presentation, he told you about his ministries. He didn't tell you that he has 18 congregations and a couple thousand members over there too. So I thought I'd throw that in as a footnote. So you can see that on the charts, our income is stable. I'm not going to go through all that though. And our membership numbers are starting to go up. And I'm losing energy. And I realized, Joe, it's time for you to retire. But as long as I can see the light, I'll be making a contribution because I'm GCI. One of the things I want to mention, and I think you all know because we've announced it, we're relocating our headquarters from the Socialist Republic of California to North Carolina, red, white, and blue. And we're doing it for some very good reasons, not the least of which is the cost of doing business in California is double all the other states. In fact, I don't know if you ever read CEO magazine. Every year they rank all 50 states on how cost-friendly it is to do business in each one of the 50 states. And it's based on crime statistics, affordability, taxes, regulations, as well as the quality of the workforce. You know where California rates? 5-0. The bottom of the list. The worst. And, well, you're probably interested to know what are some of the others. Well, just above California is New York. I feel your pain. Just above New York is Michigan. Just above Michigan is Massachusetts. Just above them is Illinois. Yeah. But let me add, California has been the worst 8 years in a row. And so Matt Morgan and I woke up one day. So let's get out of here. And the cost of doing business in North Carolina is half of what it costs to do business in California. That is reason enough to relocate. But on top of that, we're closer to 65% of our congregations as a headquarters by moving there. So we'll be moving in April, relocating. And of our 20 staff, there's about 7 that are retiring. And then there are 7 that are going. And 7 who, their job just won't be necessary anymore. And a few of them will be replaced. But this place we're moving to, it's formerly a CIA training center. How cool is that? The place, is all wired, flat screens on many of the walls, fully furnished, in a relatively new building, which makes our relocation easier. We don't have to take all kinds of stuff with us. It's fully furnished. Very nice. And we paid $4-something million for it. I like that the price was quite a bit lower than what we would have spent if we would have built our own. And we were planning to build our own because we couldn't find a good place, but then suddenly, as Matt kept checking the market, this place appeared. And now we own it, lock, stock, and barrel, fully paid off. And now I feel like one of those late night commercials, but wait, there's more. We bought our property in Glendora for $5 million 10 years ago. And Matt was thinking, well, we'd probably get $8 million for it, and we got a broker. This guy's a mover, man, and a shaker. And he came and looked at the place and said, oh, no, we're listing this for $10.2 million. I said, I like this guy. I like the way he thinks. And we've had a couple of tours come through, people interested in buying it, and we may have a hot one on the line. They've come back 3 times for a tour. Mitch Vasseur is the guy our staff who gives the tour, and he was telling me, he said, you ought to hear these guys talk, Joe, when I take them through the place and the office. I mean, they've already figured out who's going to be in each office. They're talking like it's theirs. So I ask that you pray about that with me. We are hopeful we will get an offer from them. I'm hopeful. I'm praying for the timing of it to be right. It would be perfect if they wanted to buy it and move in April. I'm hoping they don't want to get it sooner, because we would sell it to them sooner, but then we have to work out a little leaseback agreement so we can still be in there a while. But let's please, take that to God in prayer. We have been, and He sure seems to be answering well. Let me show you a few pictures of the new headquarters building. That's what it looks like from the outside. Nice looking place. Good air conditioning, although I guess when no one's there, it cycled off, and Robert Meade had to go there and get that fixed. But next slide, you see another picture from the inside. As the entrance area, you walk in, and you can see Greg Williams waving hello to all of you. Welcome to our new headquarters. Next slide, we show a picture of one of the office rooms, a conference room, and you can see it's furnished quite nicely, and plenty of windows. Next slide, another office, nice windows. Remember I said it's fully furnished? And the good part about that is that means we can leave our building fully furnished, and the one party most interested asked if we would sell it fully furnished. And Matt Morgan had a really good answer. Everything's negotiable. Next slide, you see another picture here of a smaller conference room. And I think the next slide is, some of the kitchen facilities. So again, everything looks brand new and in very good state. Next slide is another picture of a conference room. So you can see it's spacious. There are the nice ample hallways. Everything's clean and looks new and almost has the new car smell, only I guess this would be new building smell. Another picture of training room. I can see in the future that being filled with new pastors for training and for whatever else Greg envisions needs to be done in there. And in addition to relocating and realizing, the differential of selling the old building, we're doing an update of our website. We're going to do for lack of a better term, a facelift, and I can show you on the next slide what the new website will look like. That'll be the cover, the first page you see. And that should be finished in the next 3 months. I mean, all the material will be there. It'll be just organized in a better way and easier to access. Our website, it's a remarkable thing to me. Our website does a ministry of its own. Because I receive requests almost every week, at least 3 times a month. I get requests from a church somewhere in Asia or Africa, and even occasionally United States, of a church that wants to join us. In fact, the latest was a church in the Dominican Republic. We don't have any churches in the Dominican Republic, but a fellow named Yoel and his wife have been studying our website, and he said, "Can I join your church?" And of course, I'm very welcoming. Bienvenue, bienvenidos, mabuhay. I can say it in many languages. And we sent Hector Barrera and Ihiber Tkach to meet with Yoel. They were there for a couple of days and visited his church. He's a church planter. He has planted 6 or 8 churches in his 15 years in ministry. And he's currently pastoring 2 churches, and both of those would join GCI as we're negotiating and talking about that with him. I think we're on a sort of a trial run for the next 6 months before that becomes official. And Charles Fleming and Robert McKinney, I think, will be maybe overseeing that, and because it's in the Caribbean. And he told us that 4 of the other churches he planted would probably come along if he formally joins us. So that's cool. 6 more congregations, I'll take them. I mentioned the story about meeting Rick Warren the other day. I met a fellow named Ed Stetzer. I don't know how many of you know who Ed Stetzer is. Oh, a lot of hands go up. Yeah. Ed's the executive director of the Billy Graham Center for Evangelism. And Ed's also, he's the chair of the evangelistic school at Wheaton. And the first time I met him, now this is, my goodness, eight or so years ago, it was a similar thing to Rick Warren. I went up to him and said, "Well, I'm glad that you accepted our invitation to be a guest speaker at our conference. And I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about us. We're very Trinitarian. The nature of God should inform and direct all doctrine. And we're very incarnational." And he said, "Joe, I watch your speaking of life. I know." But I got another good story that I want to share that I got from John McLean. One of our board members in Australia named Kevin Summers and his wife recently took a holiday to Norfolk Island. Norfolk is a tiny island that's about 750 miles off the coast of Australia. You might have heard of it. It's the island where the famous Mr. Fletcher led the mutiny from the Bounty. You all remember that story, Captain Bligh? Well, that little island of Norfolk is where they, left the ship and had their mutinous fun. Anyway, it's a very isolated island, and it has a very small population. Even though it's part of Australia, they dance to the beat of a different drum. And it has a church on this small island, and it's an Anglican church, and there's a very young priest at that church. And so Kevin and his wife decided, it's Sunday, and we might as well go there for church. And so they were there, and they met the pastor, and Kevin said, well, I'm a member of GCI. And the young Anglican pastor said, oh, I've heard of Joe Tkach. I watch his Speaking of Life. Gee, that just amazes me. Now, in the process of redoing our website, we did something that's called a Wordle. A Wordle is what we call it. It's an emotional marketing tool. And maybe you've seen some of these. They become popular in the last several years, and you see them, a lot of these things on websites. And it was invented by a IBM software engineer, and it became this social bookmarking engine that he toyed around with. And when he first invented it, people made fun of him and said it's just a toy. Little did he realize it would become a big marketing tool now. But there's two ways to do a Wordle. One is called an unconditioned Wordle, and that is you get a sampling of people, and in this case we got 300 people, and ask them to describe GCI. And the bigger the word, the more that word was used as a response. The smaller the word, the less it was used. But it's present because it was used. So for an unconditioned Wordle, where no prompting involved at all, people just off the top of their head pick a word for GCI, I kind of like it. Faithful and diverse and courageous and friendly and accepting. Big letters, aren't they? And then we did a second Wordle, and this is, of course, called the conditioned Wordle, where you take a list of words and let them choose from the list of words. And on the next slide, you can see the conditioned Wordle of how people look for us. Friendly, loving, faithful, caring. I like those words. I'm glad we're described that way. Now, we know God is done and is doing something remarkable with us. And on the next slide, I reiterate that God doesn't make junk. Jesus is making us into who he has created us to be. And it's a lifelong process that will even transcend this mortal life. You remember Gary Detta was talking about justification, sanctification, and glorification. I think about glorification a lot, and maybe you do too as you age. Because this body, when you look at my beard, I think you see all the peppers gone. Pretty salty now. And less hair than I used to have on top, too. And I don't know, am I shrinking? I feel like I'm shorter than I used to be. But this is what happens when we age. And I think about what it's going to be like when we're glorified. Now, I know I'm still mortal and think in mortal ways, because I think about my hobby. I used to brew beer. I know everyone knows that. If you don't, I hope it's no surprise. And of course, I stopped brewing because anything I would make, any recipe I would think to make, I would Google it and find there's 10 breweries already making it. So I thought, well, I need to start tasting these, tasting more. There's over 22,000 beers in the world today, and I'm only at 3,800. So I probably will go a ways before I start brewing again. But in thinking about glorification, I think, when Tammy and I once a week go visit a brewery, I have a flight, a sampler of 4, sometimes 8. They're little pours. But then you have to stop at a certain point. You can't just keep pounding the beer. And that's when I think of glorification. I think, when I'm glorified, it won't affect me that way. I can just enjoy the flavors and the mix, the what God has created. No penalty involved. And I think about it when I'm eating shrimp scampi, all that garlic butter. You can just feel it in your veins. It's collecting. The diameter of your veins are shrinking as you eat that stuff. And I think, yeah, in a glorified body, no cholesterol. My biggest worry is, and it's not really a big worry, it's just that in a glorified body, those things may not mean anything to me anymore. I won't need them. I won't want them. But God is a good God, and that's why he told us, eye hath not seen, ear hath not heard, nor has our mind even yet comprehended what is in store for us. You know I have a pretty wild imagination, and this thought fascinates me about glorification. No matter how cool of something I can think of, what it will be like, that verse tells me, you're wrong, Joe, it's better. Yow! It is too wonderful for me to contain. I think about glorification a lot. And I think about how God has chosen all of us in Christ. That's why I have that picture up there. How he's chosen all of us in Christ, and he is making us into who he created us to be. There's a movie that Tammy and I, well, we've watched it several times with our daughter. Maybe you're familiar with it. It's called A Knight's Tale. How many of you have seen that? Really cute story. How someone rises above his rank, the rank and file of being a slob and slave labor, and he enters the higher class. And there is this clip in the movie that I want to show you. So if you can dim the lights, or I guess you don't have to, just crank up the volume and play that next video for us, Stephen.
Leave, Roland. Let them have me.
God love you, William. So do I.
Go! Stick fast! Or I will fall you! As Jesus Christ the Nazarene and his most holy mother, the Virgin Mary, are my witnesses, I will fall you! I will rip your fist down blind! Stick my fist in pictures! Pain! Lots of pain!
We're in trouble.
Listen to me! Listen to me!
What a pair we make, huh? Both trying to hide who we are. Both unable to do so. Your men love you. If I knew nothing else about you, that would be enough. But you also tilt when you should withdraw. And that is knightly too.
Release him.
He may appear to be of humble origins, but my personal historians have discovered that he is descendant from an ancient royal line. This is my word, and as such is beyond contestation. Now, if I may repay the kindness you once showed me, take a knee.
my father, King Edward.
And by all the witnesses here, I dub thee Sir William.
Arise, Sir William.
I guess you see what I'm saying. Jesus' word is beyond contestation. He's done this for all of us in here. And aren't we glad he did? Our true identity is in him. We don't have to hide from that anymore. Sadly, some people deny it. Some people hide from it. Some people are trying to change their identity. But no matter what surgery they may have done on themselves, no matter what hormones they take, no matter what lengths they go to, they can't change who they are. Every cell in their body still says what they were born to be. And I don't want to be tilting when I should be withdrawing. So that's why I announced my retirement, but I'm not going to quit right away. I'm not going to retire till January 1st, 2019. So I'll be around here a little bit longer, and the position I'm in is the same position we're all in. In the next slide, I have a picture of a bunch of people going on a race. Poetry and metaphors, figures of speech like that, similes and metaphors, help us make sense of life. The famous poet Robert Frost once said, "Unless you are educated in metaphor, you are not safe to be let loose on the world." So, you want to get educated in metaphor, read the Bible. The Apostle Paul knew all about metaphors. He sure used them a lot. You know, love is a rose, man is a snake, God is a rock. These are all metaphors. And Paul really presses a metaphor that we're all Christian athletes. I really like that metaphor. He uses lots of metaphors. Our body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. You're the body of Christ, individually members of it. We're together spiritually, the dwelling place for God. For once you were in darkness, now you're in the Lord. You now in the Lord, you are light. And Paul asks, do you not know that in a race, all the runners run to compete, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may win it. Paul's using that metaphor. And of course, we're all at different levels of athletic skill. But we're all in the race, as I show on the next slide, no matter what shape you're in. No matter how old you are, no matter how athletic you are, we're all in that race that Paul talks about. Obviously, some run faster than others. Athleticism was valued in the Greco-Roman world. Athletes were esteemed. And in many places when they would hold their games, the events were, well, they were associated almost to the likeness of being in battle. And the association of the games and battle fits Paul's notion. And he's telling us that as believers, we must be fit and we must be ready. And so just because I'm retiring doesn't mean I won't remain fit and ready. And he tells us as he presses this analogy, metaphor, it's not an analogy necessarily, but he tells us to exercise self-control in all things and to run the race. Paul's insisting that we be Christian athletes. And as Christian athletes, we can only go in two directions. We can take the high road or the low road, as I point out on the next slide. I describe the high road the way my dad would describe it. My dad was famous for saying, there's only two directions you can move. Closer to Jesus or further away from Jesus. You remember my dad said that, and he couldn't get away from it. He said it in almost every sermon. And when he would pose the question, if you're feeling far away from God, ask yourself the question, who moved? And the low road, of course, is moving away from Jesus. So We want to be always constantly moving closer to Jesus. We are a people with a purpose to live out the Great Commission, to make disciples of all nations. It doesn't matter if you're a fast runner or a slow runner. We're all called to befriend new people. And you know, I have to tell you, growing up in our church in the past, you know, I didn't try to befriend new people. I liked staying in the holy huddle. And in the last 20 years, a whole new world has opened up to me as I make new friends. And I got some really good friends. And I'm looking forward to the right moment when I can invite those friends to church. As they become closer friends, the likelihood of them saying no decreases. So I commission you all to go out and make more friends, new friends. And we're always doing new things in our church. I have to tell you about a new thing my dear friend Mary Batchelor is doing. You can see her in some of her church here. You know, she's doing the American Sign Language. Well, she is going to make a American Sign Language Bible. There isn't one. Yeah. So, if you're interested in helping her put that together, you may have ideas, you may have money. Call Mary. Now, as every race involves a finish line, next slide, please. I am very conscious of finishing well. I know you've seen over the Christian community over the years. Tragically, many Christian leaders have not finished well. Right? I want to finish well. I don't want to finish by collapsing with a weak smile on my face. And I don't want to stay in this role until I do collapse. So, Greg Williams will be the one who will replace me. Our board has interviewed him and approved it, and hence I announced it to you that on January 1st, 2019, he will be the new leader of GCI. Now, I'm not going to disappear into the sunset. Retirement simply means I'll no longer be receiving a salary from the church. And I will no longer be the primary overseer of the church. But I will remain as chairman of the board for my term, which I think is 3 or 4 years. And my pastor, Bermy Dizon, is already trying to get me to speak once a month in his church. And I was thinking what I would do is Greg can start writing 1 article a month for the email update, and I'll write 3. And then after 3 or 4 months, he can write 2. You see where this is going. And I'll write 2, and then his 3, and he's 1, and I will decrease, and he will increase, and then I won't be writing anymore. That will be my happy day. It is God's joke on Joseph here. I hate writing. I loathe it. I work very hard to write things. I sometimes rewrite things 6, 7 times, and then Gary Detto edits it, and I think, oh yeah, I forgot to say that. And he makes me look 5 times more intelligent than I am. Thank you, Gary. And then I thought, for speaking of life, since 67% of the people who come to our website come to see it, I checked it this morning when I got up. And I was shocked because it's 7 a.m. here, and there were 53 people on our website. I have a little Google Analytic on my phone. I can check. And at any point in time, I can see how many people are on our phone, and 70% of them were new, first time to our website. It's a great little app that I don't know if they've given that to you yet, Greg, but you'll find it encouraging. Greg has been serving as our vice president. I've been president, he's vice president, and so he'll just be moving up a notch and taking the salary, and I won't. So that's an easy exchange. And I thought, well, Greg can do the speaking of life, and we can do the same thing. You know, once a month, twice a month, and then I will decrease and he'll increase. And then last week, Greg says, well, hey, I got an idea. You know, you can retire and you don't have to do the email anymore, but why don't you just keep doing the speaking of life? So, yeah, we'll work that out. I think it's a good idea that maybe I keep doing it, a couple of them a month for a couple years yet. But you know, this is going to be retirement. Now, in the next slide, I show right where I am this moment. That's Greg in front of me, and that's me. And I am just so eager to hand that baton to my brother Greg. And I want to tell you that, you know, Greg and Susan are just superb people. Greg is not family. I mean, Greg is not like family. Greg is family. When Greg and Susan did their internship many years ago, he was sent to train under my sister and brother-in-law, for those of you who remember Doug, Horchek, and Tanya. And Doug was a good pastor. And in some ways, I thought Doug was even a better pastor than me. He just had certain gifts. So I know Greg was trained well in pastoral ministry. And then he left the church's employ for several years and worked for other Christian organizations. And Greg has had a breadth of experience that I just celebrate. And so, since he has those same 4 personal core values I have, I am so comfortable that I'm eager to hand him that baton. And I pray you'll give him the same support you have given me. On the next slide, I want to honor a few more people. You can see the cartoon. It says they didn't know who these new guys were, but boy, could they handle a baton. For the first time, this last couple decades is the first time in the history of our fellowship that we've actually had competent, properly trained, degreed people in their positions. You know, in the past, we had people who were the treasurer and controller who had no financial training. We had people who, here's their gift mix that they should have for this job. That's not what they had. They had this over here, and they were probably the worst choice to put into that job. That's how it used to be. It's not that way anymore. We have the right people in the right places, and that's what God has done with us. I so celebrate that. Matt and Pam Morgan, where are you guys? Where's Matt? There they are. Matt and Pam have been my right-hand people. There are different models for denomination headquarters to have. There is the small HQ model where you only have 3 or 4 people in an office. And when we were in the financial slide, I was thinking, boy, if we go to that, well, there'll be Matt and Pam and me, maybe one other, and we'll get it done because they are workers. And I don't want to leave out the other people in the office. Debbie Nickel-Paz, my assistant, she wasn't able to be here for this conference. This is the first one she's ever missed. But I told her I would pass on her loving greetings to all of you. She's like family, too. Well, she is family. Debbie used to babysit our children from infancy on. She's been with us since I started working for the church back in whatever year that was in the 80s. And Sella has a special ministry on the phone. She talks to people all day. She prays with people. She just does a spectacular job. And Sella will be retiring, so she won't be coming to Charlotte, but that's okay. I want to keep some people in California where I have to suffer. Maureen Workington has worked in personnel, and so she'll be retiring too. and she's done an outstanding job. She's a quiet, feminine person, but boy, she gets the job done. Terry Akers he'll be retiring, so he won't be coming, and Gwen, our payroll person, will be retiring. She won't be coming. Some of those things will be jobbed out and done by another concern, and so we won't even have to have an employee doing that. Cheryl Corson is Matt's assistant. She'll be going. My Cajun brother, Mitch Vasseur. I'm praying that whoever buys our building in Glendora will keep Mitch. And it just so happens this interested party has asked that very question. Can they keep him? So I hope my prayer gets answered positively on that. Now, you've heard all the, we call them mission developers. I guess the name's okay. You don't find it anywhere else in the world. It's kind of a unique name. But if we were to use a biblical name, we would probably call them our archbishops. And they're all fabulous people. You all saw them present over their areas. Gary and Wendy Moore, that's a twofer. You know what a twofer is, you get two for one. Wendy was our national ministry leader in South Africa, and then she married Gary, and now Canada gets a double load. And they still consult and help oversee in Africa every year. Gary was my classmate in college, and he's retiring actually before me this year, and he's passing the baton to Bill and Averill, sitting right in front of me, the halls. They've had a nice, orderly process of the board interviewing, approving, and the baton is now, at this point, in both their hands. But Gary's about to let go. And in upcoming, we have more of these that'll take place over the next 3 years. Rod and Ruth Matthews, again, classmates. Ruth I know in Pasadena. Rod was in the same class, but in Brickett Wood. And he really should have been in Pasadena, but that's okay. We won't hold that against him. But he's about to pass the baton as well, another year. And where's at the end of this year, Rod? 6 months, yeah. He's 6 months away. And James and Shirley Henderson. James going to pass the baton too in another year, and he has someone he's going to hand it off to, maybe a group of 3 people. Same thing with Rod. He may hand it off to a group of 2 or 3 people. Now, with Hector and Paulina Barrero and Heber and Soshi Tkach, they're young people. I don't know. I think they're barely 50. So you got a taste of what our leadership will be like when you saw their presentations and interact with them. Eugene and Lulu, they're about 3 or 4 years behind, but and he's got a team that he's working with that he'll eventually pass the baton to. But Eugene is he's sly. He's really clever. He'll call me up and say, "Joe, you want to come over to Philippines for the conference?" Well, yes, I want to come. He said, "Well, okay, let's have you speak 3 days, 8 hours a day, and train all these people who are going to be new pastors. And then Sunday you can give the sermon. Well, we might as well go someplace Saturday too, and you can speak there. And then Monday we can fly to another city and set up some things." And Eugene, I'm not coming over there to do Tkach seminars. He's clever. And the Deados will be going over there next month. And I had to caution Gary. I said, "Gary, it's negotiable. All things are negotiable." I think he wanted to start Gary and Kathy off with 6 cities. But I think they got it down to 2 now. So that'll go well. And Charles and Carmen Fleming, he's a couple of years away from passing the baton. He's not far behind me. And he's got a couple of people. Kernani, he mentioned in his presentation. Of course, Robert McKinney in the wings. We'll be taking on more and more. And then John and Heather McLean, the youngsters, they're not even 60 yet, so they have more time ahead. But I ask that you remember them especially in your prayers because they both have, there's a new name for it, which I'm not recalling, but chronic fatigue syndrome, where, for a couple of days you can't even get out of bed, you have no strength, and then you feel good and you get up and you're about doing work. So please pray for their strength. And I reiterate, I don't want to be like, the old Cajun brothers, Boudreaux and Thibault. They were watching these scuba divers, and they noticed the scuba divers had put on their wetsuits, and they'd put on the face mask, and they'd sit on the edge of the boat, and then they'd fall backwards into the water. And Thibault said to Boudreaux, "Hey, why'd they do that? What that for?" And of course, Boudreaux said, you don't know? You don't know why? I tell you why. If they fall in the boat, they're in the way. Gotta fall back. Pretty simple. So, I won't be falling forward into the boat, clogging things up. Greg will, in the years ahead, be presenting his vision. And I want to conclude with that theme of glorification again, because I sure have been thinking about it a whole lot lately. On the next slide, I talk about light. Light is interesting. Light, when you read in Scripture that God is the light, Jesus is the light of the world, there's just something profound about that. Light, exists simultaneously in two forms, a wave and a photon. And Jesus exists 100% human, 100% divine. There's something there. When God uses a metaphor, it's a good one. It's for a reason. And Jesus takes us into the light. And that picture in Revelation 4 just rivets my attention. There's all this refraction of light. It's a picture of what God's throne room is like, and the way he describes it in Revelation through vision to John was all this refraction of light. He tells us that God is sitting on the throne. And of course, this is all poetic and metaphoric, but that tells us, that communicates that God is in charge. He's still in charge. He's still sovereign over eternity. He's sitting on the throne always. And there are these precious stones. There's jasper, which portrays the brilliance of God's holiness. There's that red stone, the sardius stone, which portrays, because it's red, the price Jesus paid for our salvation, for us to be justified, sanctified, and glorified. And then there's this green shade of rainbow that encircles the throne, a reminder that God said, I'm never going to destroy humankind again. Remember from the flood? Noah, the rainbow? Well, here's a green one, circling the throne like a halo, portraying God's grace endures forever upon us. And the constituent spectral colors, as I try to capture here in this slide, are a picture of God's goodness and especially his glory. Now, there's multiple ways that I could try to explain this, but I put together a little video presentation of what it might look like to be given a glorified body. I know, I'm a science fiction fan, and I thought, let's conclude today with what it just might be like. And bear in mind, I know it's going to be better than this. Way better than I can imagine. The speed of light is a remarkable thing. It's 186 million miles per second. That's something like 6.7 million miles per hour. That's hard to figure how fast it is, but let me give you a calculation on it. If you had a gun that could fire a bullet at the speed of light, and you pull the trigger, it would circle the earth 7 times in a second. Pretty fast, isn't it? Light is pretty fast. And so, and scientists debate whether humans could ever travel at the speed of light. The majority of scientists say no, But there are some scientists who say, well, yeah, we can build shields to protect us so that it can be done. But the shields would have to hold up because you would have to travel 2 years at 1G force for 2 full years. You know how painful? Have you seen the astronauts in training being subjected to G forces? And they put them in a centrifuge, and at 1G, their faces are like this. It's painful. And they get them up to 3 or 4 Gs, and you can't even recognize that their face looks human. Well, you'd have to do 1G for 2 years to get to 97% of the speed of light. So I'm going to show you in this next closing slide what it might be like as we will travel at the speed of light when we receive our glorification. Could you play that for me? It's going to be fun to be glorified. And that's what we look forward to when we eat this meal that Greg is going to come up and lead us in partaking, as long as you can see the light.